Refugees, train strikes, inflation, Russia running out of bullets, the defection of prominent Democrat Krysten Sinema to run as an independent, the arrest of disgraced FTX supremo Sam Bankman-Fried, and even nuclear fusion are just some of the headlines dominating news across the world. And as is every week, joining the Informer is our very own man in Canada, the great Michael Charbon. Morning, Michael.
The great. That's a new one. I don't know if I'm great. I'm good, Michael. It's good. It's cold here in Canada, but I got to tell you, it's much colder in the UK. Goodness.
Yeah, and what's happening in the UK? The Albanian refugees, I believe, are a problem.
So the UK government just made an agreement with the Albanian government because all these migrants were coming over, and they're not wanted by any other EU countries. There's a lot of hair on the tennis ball, as some would say. And so all these Albanians are leaving Albania and they're trying to get into the UK. They've actually had to use military forces at one point here to start repelling some of these Albanian refugee claimants. And part of the problem is that when these refugee claimants are coming over to the UK, they're overpowering a lot of the social services. They're bringing a lot of crime with them. There's a huge affiliation with organized crime. So basically, they're a danger to the UK people. And that's why a lot of EU countries have been refusing Albanians from coming in, because there's just a big problem that's going on, Michael. So hopefully they've resolved that.
Yeah, and we've got a train strike in the UK as well that's causing some fairly big troubles.
Well, the train is a crucial way of transportation in the UK. Everybody uses the train and the subway. And basically, the workers have said that they're going on strike because they just can't afford to live because the cost of living has gone up so high. Imagine in January 2022 in the UK, the inflation rate was about 5%. That's somewhat manageable, is what some people would say. Here we are, like less than 8 months later in October, it's 11.5%. This is such a high record. It's something that the UK people aren't able to pay their bills, their energy bills, their gas bill, the electrical bills. They're making consumer products unaffordable. Imagine the UK staple, fish and chips. You have that twice a week. You go to the corner pub or you go to the corner fish and chip store. They're doing it once a month now because they can't afford it. Now, if they can't afford it, think of the poor guy or family or woman or the group who are trying to keep a business open. Everything is going up. Their energy prices are going up. It's terrible. They can't afford it anymore. So the rail workers and many of the other public service people are saying, we're going on strike. We just can't do this. And it's such an untimely thing because during the Christmas season, many of these businesses, that's when they make their cash. That's their little bit of a nest egg that'll hopefully tide them over in tough times in January and February, and everybody's paying their bills. So the train service not working is terrible. And so the government is saying that they may have to put military involved. And if you think what's happened in the UK in the last 6 months, the Conservatives have ousted 2 of their prime ministers, right? You had Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And Liz Truss was promising that she was going to reduce all the taxes and give all these people all this money. Well, she was tossed out because they couldn't afford that. So they elected this Rishi Sunak, who came in October. And basically what he did was raise taxes to reassure financial institutes and the rest of the EU that the UK is solvent. But that hasn't helped the average British person. And if you think as a result of Brexit and the level of taxes, which has not been as high since the end of the Second World War, that's like 1945, imagine that. Post-Brexit, post-COVID, this whole boomerang economic inflation effect is having a tremendously negative effect on the folks in the UK. And they're having a hell of a time. And yeah. I mean, it's going to come to other countries too in the EU. It's not just Britain, but it's a terrible time. Just a terrible time.
Yeah, we see some reporting about people not being able to afford to have the heating on in their homes and going to shopping centres and or what we call malls to actually spend some time in the warmth.
Well, imagine in the UK, they really don't have winter per se. So many of the houses were never built with insulation, and many of them have hot water heating, some of them, and fireplaces was always the way that the people used to heat, because it would just be enough to break the cold. But now climate change has come upon Britain as well, so there's lots more of these frigid temperatures. And yes, it's gotten to the point that people can't afford to heat their homes. As in the United States, you got to make a decision. Are you going to put gas in the car so you can get to work, or are you going to buy a pack of cigarettes, or are you going to put food on the table? I mean, it's getting to dire situations, and also many countries are realizing that the debt ratio, the ratio that people are putting stuff on credit cards and pushing it down the road, is becoming larger and larger. And as inflation comes in, interest rates go up. So people aren't afford just to cover the nut, never mind the interest. So it's going to be dire straits for a lot of people. Everybody who's been living beyond their means is going to get a real shock, and the economy is going to get a shock. And unfortunately, you could talk to many futurists. What many countries use as a solution to combat inflation and depression is war.
Yep.
Because war creates money, it mobilizes people, and that's a terrible position to be put in. And that's all that this globe needs, is another war.
Yeah, well, speaking of wars, let's move on to Russia and Ukraine, and that's the source of a lot of the rise in energy prices. Russia struggling with bullets.
True. Well, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has definitely had a huge contribution, first of all, as you stated, Michael, in the oil shortage, but also in the world economic downturn, that in combination with the COVID boomerang. But Russia's having a bit of a problem. They're running out of bullets. Their ammunition and their munitions, some of them are going to be 10 years old. They're just running out of it. They don't have the cash, and they don't have the stockpile. But unfortunately, Iranian drones are still pounding Kyiv and the Ukraine. Now, this isn't the Iranian government. These are Iranian-sold drone missiles to Russia, which is sending these puppies over, and they're just still having a huge havoc over the Ukrainian people, where there's still, it's under 35% of all Ukraine is under electrical power. Now, if you want to talk about money, the Russian economy is worth about $1.8 trillion. If you look at the amount of money amassed by the European group, the Americans, etc., who are putting this money in the Ukraine to fight Russia, it's worth over $40 trillion. Just the might of the money is going to win. I mean, there's some military experts that are saying that with Ukraine's perseverance and their resilience, that there is a chance by August or September of 2023 that they think they could take back Crimea. But inevitably, Russia is going to lose this war. They can't afford to keep it up. They conscripted 300,000 people. Not many showed up. They're having problems getting people. They can't feed them. They can't give them gas. They can't give them armaments. New recruits don't have bulletproof vests. So the Russian situation, he's got to retreat, and he's basically got to eat crow. And Putin's going to be remembered as a man who destroyed Russia. And but the Ukraine's, on the other hand, look at what they've got. Their resilience. I mean, you're fighting a guerrilla warfare. You think that in Afghanistan, the Russians would have learned their lesson. You can't win a guerrilla warfare. The Ukrainians, surface-to-air missiles. You can't fly a jet over Ukraine in helicopters because they're being shot down by these American Patriot missiles and shoulder-powered missiles. The Ukrainians are very adept in using that, and using drones to bomb Russian installations. They're also using these shoulder-armed SAM sidewinders and missiles to hit all the Russian tanks and their mobilized vehicles. So they're just decimating them. And the Russians, I mean, they're going to have even more problems, because now the U.S. is sending over 2 Patriot missile batteries over there to protect them against long-range missiles. The Patriot missiles are the same installations that the Israelis have against the rogue Palestinians who are firing missiles into the interior of Israel. Those were these Patriot defense dome that they were using. Well, there's 2 going over, and potentially 10 more going over to the Ukraine. And they've got what's called NSAMs. These NSAMs are long-range guided missiles of a really high technical support to stop long-range missiles. So the Russians are just up against a fight that they cannot win, and it's just going to be inevitable. They're just going to destroy everything that they can as they retreat. The only thing that I can say of one sparkle of hope is to hope that the Russians leave quicker, sooner than later. And if you remember what happened, I think it was called the Marshall Report, where everybody felt guilty of how they destroyed Japan and how they destroyed Germany in the Second World War, the Marshall Plan, and how all the countries put the money together to help Germany and Japan rebuild themselves. Well, look at where Germany and Japan is now in the world economic scenario. They were rebuilt, they were modernized. If the same thing happens, that the world looks upon the horrible devastation and destruction that happened in the Ukraine, does that mean in like 10 years, the Ukraine is going to be the technical infrastructure of internal Europe to take over, because everybody's going to be investing all this money into them? So it's going to be a very interesting scenario, but I just feel so sorry for the plight of the Ukrainians, and you wish that somehow the Russian people would be able to react and resolve this situation and get their leader in line, or get their leader out of line.
Yeah, it's not a very popular war within Russia either. So the Russian populace aren't behind Putin either. You wonder if it will take some sort of overthrow to bring it to a quicker end.
Well, imagine Russia had a taste of democracy. Russia had a taste of, from McDonald's to Kentucky Fried Chicken, all these companies from the global community were coming in and seeing that there was something to be had with Russia, because Russia has a lot of minerals and Russia has a lot of raw product. You kind of ignore, it's kind of like what they do with China. They kind of ignore some of the things that they don't do that North Americans or civilized countries, as one would say, would understand. But they were a huge market. Now that's all taken away. You can't travel. The ruble's worth nothing. You can't listen to international radio. You can't Google, Netflix, etc. All of that's been turned off. Now, it's kind of like the same scenario if you look at what happened in Afghanistan. When the Americans were there, women could be educated, women could go to school, women could own businesses. They didn't have to wear their head garb and be religious, religious dominance. Well, now a ruling party comes and says, that's all gone, you got to do this. You can never wash that away. The people will never let that be, because they tasted freedom. It's kind of like if you ever let a dog run wild, the dog will always run wild. It's just waiting there at the front step to go out. So the Russians have created a problem, and like I said previously, and it was reported, I think it was in the New York Times, that Putin will be remembered as a man who destroyed Russia.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the US, your neighbor to the south, and something that could herald a completely new era and do away with a lot of this energy stuff, a new nuclear fusion discovery.
Right. So this is absolutely earth-shaking. This isn't hocus pocus and butterflies, baby dogs, and koalas. This is the real thing. It's called nuclear fusion. And basically what they're doing is they're taking hydrogen atoms and they're making them collide with each other in high velocity and multiple times. So the energy that it takes to collide these hydrogen atoms together creates more energy, more heat than what was taken to create it, if you can say. So basically, they're saying that this is the power that powers the sun. It creates helium, and it creates enormous amounts of energy. So they've been able to replicate this in a laboratory. So it has zero carbon emissions. The creation of this is a quantum leap in humanity's understanding of creating power, and creating power which will not damage our world. And this was done in a California laboratory in the United States of America. It's absolutely an achievement of incredible achievement. Now, you have to understand, you've got the scientists who have been working for decades on making this happen, and they've created it, and they've made it a reality, and they've showed that it is something that can happen. Now the engineers and the other people will take that fundamental achievement that happened in the laboratory and build it out into something that we as humans could use. And inevitably, This is going to replace the internal combustion engine. It's going to far outweigh the trouble and cost of trying to harvest wind, solar to a certain extent. Solar, I think, will always be a part of it, but this fusion, nuclear fusion, is something that's absolutely going to change our lives. We may not necessarily be able to see its full execution and rollout because it's going to take a good 10 years, but with the escalation of mankind and intelligence, we may eat those words. I may eat those words, but it is absolutely a tremendous news, and it is something that I think we, as a humankind, have not fully recognized that will make our lives and our planet a better place. It's going to be quite
exciting stuff. Now, cryptocurrency, there's always seems to be some sort of controversy around it, and Sam Bankman-Fried arrested in the Bahamas.
Yeah, so this guy, I mean, he looks like such an aloof, right? So he's a vegetarian. I mean, he's got fuzzy hair. He's like 32 years old. 30 years old or so. He wears T-shirts. He doesn't look you in the eye. He's always looking down like that. He created this company called FTX, which was basically a cryptocurrency exchange company where you're allowed to liquidate and transact and make your coins into other coins. If you recall, I think Bitcoin started at 35 cents, then it went to 10 bucks, then it went to 17, 18,000, then it went to 64,000. It's about $17,000 now. The cryptocurrency scam that this guy did was worth about $32 billion. And some guy who just decides that he's going to create this base with no oversight, etc. Now, everybody's talking about the huge amount of money that he lost. Do you remember how much Madoff lost in his scam? No. $64 billion. That was Bernie Madoff. He's dead now. He died in prison. But still, if you look at this Sam Bankman-Fried, in 2021, in his taxes, he showed a net loss, carryover net loss of $3.7 billion. So there's a huge amount of questioning how you could get that much, that fast, that soon. Now, everybody said, this is cryptocurrency. There's nothing backing it. It's like a fart in an elevator. You know it's there. Someone did it, but you can't hold it, feel it, but you can maybe taste it, depending on if it was really good Indian food. So this guy put this platform together, hairy-fairy, and now, so he was sitting there in the Bahamas saying, oh, it's not my fault. I don't know what I'm doing. So basically, Currencies and Exchange went in there and influenced the Bahamians to arrest this kid. And I mean, he'll spend the rest of his life in jail. I mean, you can't run a company like that and say you don't know what you're doing. And there's billions and billions and billions of dollars and people who have lost it and will never see it again because it's this intangible, can't touch it cryptocurrency. And a lot of other cryptocurrencies have gone bankrupt because they were affiliated to FTX. But the Sam Bankman-Fried guy, I mean, he's very nonchalant. I didn't know what I was doing. I just, bankruptcy. What the heck is going on with people?
And now the Democrats, Michael, they just get control of the Senate again, and Krysten Sinema leaves to become an independent, so drawing it back to 50-50.
Yeah, it's a great gamesmanship. I mean, Krysten Sinema is going to be up for re-election in 2024. Do you want to have the collar of open borders with Title 42 being lifted and 15,000 illegal immigrants coming into the United States on a daily basis? Not so much. Do you want to be saddled with killing the gas industry and crippling half of America and making Americans pay higher taxes? Not if you're a Democrat. Well, Krysten Sinema was always more of a centrist than she was a true Democrat. And here we go after this Warnock business and Herschel Walker and all the tra-la-la of the re-election. So it's 51-49 in the Senate. That's what the deal is with regards to the Democrats and Republicans. And the Republicans own the House. And they're hopefully going to do something about the border and stop all this spending and try to get mayhem in order. And Krysten Sinema played a very smart card. I'm going to go and I'm going to declare myself an independent because she's still going to caucus with the Democrats because goodness gracious, they want her to be part of the troop. But Krysten Sinema, and if you also remember what was his name? Oh, Joe Manchin was the other guy who was the halfway in there. So depending on how things go, if you have Manchin and Sinema, those are still 2 votes that could go in the Republicans' position in the Senate. So the Senate now again becomes a little bit of a leery scenario where you've got to walk a little trepidatiously. Chuck Schumer, who's basically the majority leader, says, "Oh, Krysten Sinema is still part of one of us, and she's going to keep all her committee positionings." But that's a very subtle signal that says not everything is going to be as usual, and she's protecting her assets, as one would say, because 2024 is going to be a pivotal year. That's also the year that the UK has another election too. Yeah. So the UK and the United States, and far be it to say probably Canada too, with Trudeau and his whole bunch.
Gee, her dance card will be full, giving the Republicans would be courting her with every offer they could think of to get her to vote against her previous caucus.
And as they should. America is in a very dire way right now. America is divided because their media is divided. America is divided because the message is divided. We all have to understand that we have to come to a kumbaya at some point, but you cannot have unfettered, uncontrolled, open borders with millions and millions, 3+ million people coming in. I mean, they're showing pictures in downtown Arizona and downtown Texas, where these people are huddled like in the 30s during the Depression. And they have nowhere to go, and all the social services that are there for the people in America who have fallen through, and veterans who have fallen through, are now being eaten up like locusts by these illegal immigrants. What are they going to do with this, Michael? It's I'm telling you, there's a reckoning coming.
Yeah. All right, Michael, we've got to leave it there. So we'll be back next week for our last show before Christmas, and I'll look forward to speaking to you then.
Way to go. So prediction on France and Argentina. Who are you taking?
Argentina, Michael.
Messi
deserves it.
Good. I got to go back with my patriarchs, France. Okay, that's good. So I owe you a pint if I lose. You owe me a pint if you lose. Take care, Michael. Thanks. Yeah. And thanks to the watchers, people who are watching from the Informer. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.